Excellent. So I'm actually not going to say that everything Nick said is wrong, because I actually agree with almost everything he said. So I don't have any slides, just me, my name, the place I work. So hopefully, we'll have a lot of questions and answers and stuff. And I wanted to talk about the way that we do operations at Etsy. And in fact, even though we have a big monolithic stack, we don't have microservices. We actually do a lot of the things that Nick was talking about. We, just as an example, we've been pushing continuous delivery for a long time. It's something that we speak about very passionately. At the moment, I think we deliver code about 50 or 60 times a day on the main site. And all of those changes happen in very, very small fragments. I don't have exact statistics, but it's a small number of lines. And we do that on purpose because it makes it easy to reason about what we're doing. Same kind of thing that Nick was talking about. You want to have your code, like if you have them in microservices, that's great because you have small, discrete things that you can push out and understand what's happening with them. And we do the same thing. It just happens to be in a large monolithic stack. And I think a lot of it comes down to culture. And you can have technological solutions take you so far, but after a while, you really, really need to think about the culture that you're in. There's this wonderful nugget, Conway's Law, which can sort of be summarized as you ship your organizational culture. Whatever culture you have, that is what you're delivering to your customers. If your culture happens to be one that empowers employees and delivers good code and good quality, that is what you're going to ship out. If your culture is built around silos and divisiveness and separating people out into different areas and they don't talk to each other, well, that's what your final product's going to look like. And that, I think that's really one of the main reasons why we don't have microservices at Etsy, is because we kind of force people to work on all parts of the stack quite often. And we have people who move around and they work on different projects at different times. And because it's all one large stack, it's great. Anyone can understand what it's doing because it all ties together. And it's really not that complicated. It's actually fairly easy to reason about. One of the things we do, for example, if you do use microservices and you're pushing stuff out very quickly, you're doing it in a Scrum, you're doing it in a sprint, whatever, we actually have every developer that joins Etsy delivers code on their first day to the live site. Because it's easy. It doesn't have to be complicated. I don't think you necessarily need to use microservices, but I think it can be done the other way. But anyway, that's enough about development. So the operations team at Etsy, we have 8 people on the production operations team. We have, I think, 5 people on the network operations team. Then we have a number of other little groups. We have security and the corporate IT group. In the production operations team, we have 8 people, and 5 of us are remote engineers. It works really well. We're very heavily invested in people being remote engineers, and I think we figured out ways that we can make it work. We can talk about that a little bit if people are interested. We manage, I think right now, about 1,000 servers, 1,000, maybe 1,200 servers. I think it's gone up a little bit in the last couple of weeks. Our stack, like I said, it's actually fairly simple. It's a LAMP stack, if anyone still remembers those. I know Node.js and things are the nice new hotness, but again, fairly simple, nothing too complicated there. A lot of the things, a lot of the talks I give these days do end up focusing on culture a lot. So if that's something that interests people, we can certainly talk about that. But I'd like to open it up. If anyone has questions, anything they're interested about, anything they want to hear about Etsy, or what we do, or how we do things. Anybody? Yes?
So it seems to be constantly held up as the poster boy of DevOps.
Yeah, why is Etsy held up as the poster boy of DevOps? What?
Why do you think it is?
So I think there's a number of reasons. I think we were very fortunate with the leadership we have. Our CEO, who used to be the CTO, Chad Dickerson, comes from Flickr. And the current CTO and the SVP of operations are all from the same organization before. And they work very well together, and they understand the importance of technology and the importance of engineering. We are a site where people sell a lot of very interesting goods that they've made, a lot of very interesting handcrafted goods. But we're a software engineering company first. What we do is we engineer, and that is really the core of what we do. And we speak about it I think everywhere that I've worked has had the opportunity to speak about it, about what they do, how they do it. I just think Etsy's been prolific about it. We've just gone out and we've just spoken and spoken and spoken and told people what we're doing. And there's probably a little bit of right time, right place in there as well. It happened that a lot of the things we were speaking about came about when the DevOps movement got going. So it just kind of meshed together very well there. I think that's really one of the big reasons. I think there's a lot of interesting things there as well. Before Etsy, I think I'd worked at 2 places that sort of kind of promoted the idea of blameless post-mortems. There was one place I'd worked that had post-mortems, but they were incredibly blameful. The whole purpose of it was just to find people to blame and say, "You did it! You're gone." The idea of blameless post-mortems is something that's certainly helped propel this idea that Etsy is a very big and powerful DevOps force. It's just an idea that we have, and we like it, and it works, and it's proven to work, and I think that's why we've been so successful.
If you have a monolithic architecture, how do you actually reduce the amount of cumbersome codes by using feature flags or things like that?
So if we have a monolithic architecture, how do we reduce the number of
cumbersome codes?
The amount of cumbersome code, and so on. We don't. We just have a high rate of churn on the code. We know that there are places in the code that have problems, and they, more often than not, they just get replaced over time. Because we have so many people working on so many parts of the code, if there is a bit of code that ends up being a little bit of a mess, it doesn't necessarily, people look at the code and they say, this is surprisingly less complex than it sounds like from the outside. When we say monolithic architecture, most people think, it's this huge spaghetti of code that everything ties in and it's all over the place. And it's really not like that. A lot of it is just about being sensible with how you write code. You can have code that can almost be like microservices inside your larger application. And just keeping things discrete and easy to reason about. If you look at some code and it's hard to reason and figure out why it's doing what it's doing, that's more the problem than the fact that you have a large monolithic application. Because you can have the same problem with microservices. There's nothing preventing you from having horrendously complex code inside a microservice. It's a cultural thing. It's an idea that you want to keep things small and discrete. And we just do that with the code that we have. Not the perfect answer, I know, but it's for example, I'm not a developer by any means. I try and be one sometimes, but I've looked at our code base many times when I've been trying to fix a problem and I haven't been able to find somebody quickly enough. And even as a non-developer, I've been able to figure out what's going on just because every component of the code is laid out so well and in distinct and understandable pieces that it's easy to reason. One at the very back.
What's the biggest challenge Etsy's facing at the moment, DevOps-wise?
What's the biggest challenge Etsy's facing, DevOps-wise? Growth and... Huh? Alistair? No, sorry, I thought you were going to say something. A lot. I think a lot of it is to do with, from my perspective, is to do with growth and hiring. We're growing, and it's really, really difficult to hire people, just because there aren't very many people who are on the market, and trying to grow new operations engineers is just difficult. If anyone's tried it, it's hard. I started a little initiative about 2 years ago called Ops School. I know some people here have probably seen it, and it's helped. It's certainly brought in a few people that we've spoken to and liked, and a couple of them we've hired. But it is without a doubt one of the most difficult things. We could move a lot faster if we could find more people to hire, and it's forced us to do some interesting things. For example, I joined Etsy about 4 years ago, and at the time the operations team was sort of the central, pivotal team around production, and knew the most about what was going on with every bit of the infrastructure. And over time we've pushed more of that out to the developers, and I think that's one of the things we're going to have to keep doing over time. For example, when I started, we we have a search team who's responsible for a fairly large search stack. It runs Linux, Java, Solr, all kinds of stuff. And honestly, it's a piece of the infrastructure that I understand the least because I don't understand search engines very well. And for some reason, the operations team was managing it when it broke, and what we ended up doing most of the time was either just restarting the service over and over again until it worked, or finding someone on the search team to call and say, hey, can you come take a look at this and tell us why it's broken? And we just pushed all of that out to that search team and said, anything that goes wrong with this service, you guys are on call for it now. The only time we want to get paged is if a host goes down, if a server physically goes down. And after a while, we just took that out. I haven't been paged for anything to do with search in probably about 2 years now. It helped. So we started doing that more and more with other teams, just pushing these alerts and this management outwards. That's helped with some of the struggles that we've had. That's probably the biggest thing. I think everything else kind of stems from that. Yeah. There's a question back here somewhere. Somebody?
You have a monolithic application, but this means that when you release, you refresh all the stack, or you just change one small part of the system?
We have a monolithic application, so when we release, do we refresh the whole stack or just one piece of it? Our deployment pipeline is really actually fairly simple. We have, I'm going to say about 150 to 200 servers that we deploy code to when we do a release. And we just use rsync, honestly. So we have 2 document routes. We use Apache. We have 2 document routes. What we do is we push the code out, whatever change it is. Let's say there's 5 changes that are bundled up. 5 people are delivering code at the same time. Each change may touch 3, 4, 5 files, so maybe you have like 25 files that have changed. Those files get rsynced out to sort of the unused, the dormant doc route on all the servers, and then we have another process that comes by and then flips a symlink to point from the active to the non-active document route. So we do only change the small piece that we use in terms of what we push out, and everything else that's unchanged is cached. We use PHP. The op cache just has everything cached in memory, so only those bits that are actually changed get refreshed. It keeps things fairly simple. I don't know if there's an upper limit to how long we can keep doing this. One of the things we really try and do is keep deployment times as low as possible. I think we have it down to a couple of minutes at the moment, maybe a little bit less. When I first started, I think deployment times were less than a minute, and they kind of crept up to about 2 or 3 minutes. And we've been trying to bring those down. We always try and keep them as low as we can. But it's a challenge. It's sort of a give and take. Like, how much are you pushing out to how many systems versus what you're doing.
Do you end up with any kind of smoke tests for the load?
Yes.
I know, like Indu does.
Yeah, we do have smoke tests. At the end of every deployment run, we trigger a whole bunch of tests. So we have multi-stage deployment. First it goes out to our staging systems, and then it goes out to production. And at each point of that, we run smoke tests to make sure everything's running fine. Those do take a couple of minutes, by themselves to run. There's a lot you have to test, and we're always adding more. But yeah, those run as soon as the deployment is triggered. And in fact, an interesting thing is we do a lot of our communication over IRC. We have an internal IRC server. We have a channel called Push, and we have a couple of bots in IRC which really help us with the whole deployment pipeline. One is called IRC-cat and one is called DevBot. And IRC-cat, one of the functions it does in this push channel is it just updates the topic of the channel with who the current people are who are pushing code and what the status is of the deployment, whether it's on staging, whether it's on production, and what's happened. And every time somebody does a deployment, the IRC-cat bot actually says something in channel which then triggers the DevBot bot to then go and run smoke tests. So we actually have bots doing most of our work for us. It's really nice. Yes?
Would you care to offer 2, 3, what you consider to be the core principles of DevOps?
Oh God. Somebody's asking me what the core principles of DevOps are. That's a really loaded question. Thank you. For me, communication, without a doubt, is one of the most important things. If you don't have communication between not just other teams, but also internally on your own team, the whole system crumbles. It doesn't work, and it can't keep up. That would be my number one thing. The number two thing would be instituting a culture of learning. You have to be able to look at where you've come from. You have to be able to look at where you're going. You have to be able to understand what's happened and what you've done. If you ever listen to talks by Andrew Schaefer on the subject, he talks about learning organizations a lot.
Peter Singh.
Yeah, exactly, Peter Singh. So that would be definitely the number two on the list. And after that, I'm not actually sure what number three would be, because I think once you have those two, almost everything tends to stem from those. You know, you have collaboration coming off of your communication between your teams. You have teams working together. And once you have a learning organization, you're always moving forward.
Is that hourly rate,
So,
Is that hourly rate?
say again, Nick, sorry.
Hourly rate!
Hourly rate!
This is all about hourly rate, come on!
Quiet in the back.
I'd add one. What I think is one of the most important things in DevOps, what you're trying to do is reduce that cycle time and make commits easy, is to make fixing fuck-ups easy.
Fixing fuck-ups easy, yes. Make fixing fuck-ups really easy. And that's really the core of why we do so many deployments a day. They're always very, very small. You know, if you're deploying 200, 400, 1,000 lines of code at a time, and something breaks, it's way more difficult to reason about why it broke and what happened than if you're deploying 5 lines of code or 10 lines of code. So yeah, okay, we'll make that number 3 then. I'm happy with that. Mark?
What do you give enough context to developers in order to bring production services?
Say that again?
How do you give enough context to developers in order to the production service and not screw things up?
How do you give enough context to developers to touch production servers and not screw things up? I tell them, you break it, you buy it. So, and it's very simple. I tell them the same things that I tell new operations engineers if they start. If you touch something and you break it, it's okay, because we've all done that. It's a process of learning. So usually developers start out, if they haven't touched a production system before, we let them, you know, any developer can log into almost any of our production systems at any time. It's fairly open. There's no big secrets there. There are some systems that we lock down more, of course, but by and large, that's kind of the way it is. And anyone can log in. Anyone can look at what they need to. They can find out what they need to about the system, how things are running. They can run anything they need to. It's great, but they understand that if they do that and they break something, well, then we're going to have to figure out why it broke. And rather than turn around and punish them and say, you did a bad thing, you shouldn't have run this command, this is a terrible thing, you know, we're going to take your access away, we look at what happened and why it did. So as an example of this, you know, I'm not a developer, but this kind of thing happens to me all the time. And this is one of the things that's very cultural and where sort of the blameless post-mortem idea stems from. Yesterday was the busiest shopping day of the year on Etsy. It was Cyber Monday. You know, a lot of people in the US are doing their shopping. A lot of people all over the world are doing their shopping. It's a big deal. And we've been preparing all year for this day. Everything after this is a little bit easier. Things kind of taper off a little bit. Not a lot. There's still a lot of pressure. A lot of people shopping. Christmas is coming up. But yesterday was the big day. And I logged into the systems for the first time in a few days. I've been on holiday. I've been doing other stuff. Having a cold. And I logged into the systems, and somebody had been talking about memcache latency. Normally, you know, all of our memcache calls return within a few milliseconds, but there was an odd pattern where a very, very small fraction of them were taking 205 milliseconds, 210 milliseconds, 207, instead of like 5 or 7 or 10. There's always this extra 200 milliseconds. So I logged into one of the memcache servers and started looking around, trying to figure out what was going on. And I thought I wasn't doing anything bad. I was just running SS, looking at SOCSAT, looking at network statistics. And the next thing I know, somebody's telling me, guys, the site's down. Why? I didn't do it. I swear I didn't do it. It turns out I did do it. One thing we didn't realize is the SS command, if you're running it on CentOS 7, actually looks at /proc/slabinfo. And if anyone's ever run slab top on a high volume server, you may know that there's this beautiful little mutex in the kernel around looking at memory slabs, and it pauses the entire server for a few milliseconds every time it refreshes. So here I'm running sockstat over and over and over and over again, trying to figure out what's going wrong, and the site's going and it lasted for about a minute or two, and everyone's like, what's going on? Why is this thing breaking? And eventually I was like, no, there's no way anything I could have been doing broke this. And I was adamant about this. I was like, there is no way looking at what network connections are open is going to bring down a server. And the server itself, as far as I could tell, was operating fine. But memcache is very latency sensitive. And a few pauses like that really add up very, very quickly when you're doing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of memcache lookups a second against every server. And somebody says, guys, it's memcache 22. I'm like, I was on that box. Fuck. And no one for a moment said, what the fuck were you doing? This is the busiest shopping day of the year. Why are you messing around with memcache? The immediate thing that everybody went to was, you were doing this, let's find out why this caused a problem. So somebody went on to another server, started running SS under strace, and then I went off and looked at the source code for SS, and yeah, sure enough, there it is. It's looking at slab info. It was a thing. Nobody blamed me. Nobody got angry with me. It was a thing that happened, and we moved on. And we do the same thing with developers. You have to. If you have a culture, you're just pointing at people and looking for people to blame, you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to dig yourself into a hole where nobody wants to do anything productive, constructive, interesting. Everyone just wants to protect themselves, and it becomes very poisonous. I'll go back there for a moment.
Well, you mentioned there about people wanting to go and do interesting things. Do you find that that choice of technology, the PHP side of it, restricts that hiring group that you can get in terms of developers?
Do I think the choice of our stack PHP and other things with it restricts the hiring that we can do? Absolutely not. I know quite a few people at Etsy who started at Etsy with very, very little PHP experience, and it's really not the language that matters. If you get good developers, they're not tied to one language. That, you know, I've definitely seen developers who say, I will never work in an environment that uses PHP. It's a terrible language. I'll only work in somewhere that's written entirely in JavaScript. All right, fine, be like that. We're solving interesting problems. We're hiring as well, like everybody in this room probably. It's really not. Like it actually, if anything, it helps find people who are interested in solving the problems, improving the system, than stuck on some ideology about like one specific language that they do or don't want to write in. Alistair, you had your hand up first.
In terms of no blame culture, I've heard it described as the 5 hows rather than 5 whys. Why is very easy to figure out, say, this one. 5 how is, how do we avoid in the future, avoid blame?
Yes, so you know, the blameless culture being described as the 5 hows rather than the 5 whys. There's a really good book, The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error by Sidney Dekker, which I would highly recommend to every single person in this room. It's a short book. You can get it on Amazon for a couple of pounds, but you can read it in a day or two. But incredibly good to read, and talks about this a lot. About how you move on and how human error is really, it's not the end of an investigation, it's not the end of finding a problem, it's the beginning. And from there you have to move on and say, well, how did this happen? You know, instead of well, why did we let it happen? So, yeah.
As being such a big company, how do you keep your stack this much simple? I mean, how do you approach the people coming with new technologies? When you have someone with a strong Java background, and this guy starts to write PHP, but he can come up with a really good solution in the Java or any other programming language. How do you approach these people?
How do we approach things? How do we keep the stack really simple, especially when we have a lot of people coming in who may not have strong PHP experience or whatever? we do it through a number of ways. First, there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of discussion between people on how to approach problems, how to solve problems. So it's never a case of one person sitting down doing things in isolation. There's always collaboration, not just like inside a team, but also with other teams. So you feed off of that. You feed off of building on top of communication, and after that, we have, like I said, the architecture is very simple, but it's not completely flat. It's not only PHP and MySQL. We have some Redis in there. We've got Memcache. We have some legacy Postgres databases, and we approach it by initially having architecture reviews. So if somebody comes up and says they maybe have a new technology that they're interested in, Redis is for us, it's a very recent and really good example of this. We take a look at what the use case for it is. Why is it that we want a new technology or a new way of doing things, a new design pattern, instead of doing it the way we have done it? So we sit down, usually with a few of the senior engineers, and we look at what it is we're trying to do. Why is it we're solving it, wanting to solve it with this new way instead of the old way? And if we can justify it, if we can really justify having something different in there compared to how we've been doing it previously, then we'll go ahead and do it. But it turns out those ways, those times that we need to do that are fairly small. We have some somewhat fairly well set design patterns in how we like to order things and how we like things done. And everyone, once they start working inside that model, it turns out pretty well. So I think Mark's about to take the mic away from me. Cool. Okay. What? I'll let Mark explain what's about to happen.
All right, so we're giving one big away thanks to Riley. There you go, thank you, Alf. So I was just asking Alf, of the talk he just did, ask something back, see if people were actually listening. Yeah, I know, Nick, I know. And we're giving this away for you. It's a very good book from Ilya Gregory, one of the best books I've read this year.
Yeah, this guy's amazing. I haven't read the book, but just based on the author, I can tell that everybody in this room should, again, along with that Field Guide to Understanding Human Error, read this one too. Let's see. Somebody name two of the, somebody name two of the technologies that I've mentioned in this talk. Ah, who said that? Right there. One book for you, sir. Excellent. I'll be around eating pizza if anyone would like to talk some more. Thank you.
Enjoy, and thank you again for coming.